So today, I'm going to go into some detail about mechanical drawing lines. In a mechanical drawing, there's several different kinds of lines. We've talked about this some before, but I want to go into, as I said, go into some detail about it because the clarity of a drawing depends on using these properly. I mean, the person who's reading the drawing is expecting a certain standard, so the person drawing it should be working on that approach. Okay, so the alphabet of lines is going to be describing the different lines you use on the drawing and the ways that they are important, and they help to clarify the information that the person drawing is trying to communicate to the viewer and to the reader, right? One of the things, and we'll look at this later, this presentation doesn't cover lettering. Lettering is really important too. You need to make sure that you're writing information on there when you put on dimensions or other notes on a drawing. You need to do it in a way that's very, very legible. You don't want to have the user, there are times when you look at a piece of paper where somebody's written stuff and you kind of say, well, what did they write here? A little curvy, curly Q thing there. Is that a 3 or a 5 or whatever, right? So we will look later at ways to, even if you don't have fabulous handwriting, if you're careful with doing lettering on a mechanical drawing, you can make your information clear, okay? So look here, alphabetical lines, again, talking about the standards for the ways to illustrate stuff and make it very clear to the reader. Okay, this particular drawing here, and I'm going to provide you with this presentation. I don't know if you can really tell. Actually, and maybe I'll zoom in just a little bit on the sketch there to make it a little more obvious. Okay. Okay, hopefully you can see the sketch a little bit. It's a little, I think later in the presentation there's a better deal here. Anyhow, there's a lot of information going on in this drawing, and the fact that this visible line or object line right here is thicker than the hidden line, also thicker than the center lines and dimension lines and those kinds of things, conveys information, right? So the primary thing is to know that the visible lines here, and we'll talk about this in a minute again, the lines that are the visible edges of the drawing, anywhere that you have visible edges of the object, those should be significantly darker, bolder lines. Now when you draw these, you do want your lines to be, the term dark is a little bit misleading. You want this to be a dark line. You want it to be a solid amount of lead on the page. But excuse me, the weight of the line has to do with how thick you make it, okay? So this is a bolder line, that's a thicker line, and your object lines tend to be the thickest lines in the drawing, okay? Now we're going to go back to, let's zoom back out a little bit here and get the whole slide in view. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and I'll just run down here: construction lines, visible lines, hidden lines, center lines, dimension lines, and so on down the thing. Some of these become a little bit redundant, and so for our class, we probably won't have to be concerned about the difference between a long break line and a short break line, a cutting plane versus section line. Some of these things are essentially the same thing. Okay, so let's take a quick look here. Okay, so construction lines, this is supposed to be a construction line here. They're showing you really, a construction line is the lightest line you can possibly create on a drawing, on a piece of paper, period. You want to, just barely put any pressure on your pencil, maybe possibly a hard pencil like a 5H or 6H, at least a 4H pencil, to get a tiny thin line, because the idea of a construction line is it's not supposed to be permanent. It's there to help you construct the view. So if you're projecting lines across from the front view over to the right side view, and just very lightly draw those lines so that you can erase away the extra later, and so it'll erase cleanly. Right? So a construction line should be so light that if you hold the drawing very far from your face, you can't see it or it's barely visible. Okay? So I really can't emphasize that enough. Make them really, really light, just enough for you to be able to do your drawing later, but not enough that it's hard to get rid of them. Okay? Then, of course, visible are object lines. You can see here it's shown as a very bold line, right? Thick and dark, definitely thicker than construction lines, most prominent line on the drawing. So you really should be able to tell the object line is the deal. That's the thing. That's the thing, and that's the most important thing for the user to see. Okay, hidden lines, they're not tremendously thin, but they're definitely thinner than an object line. And of course, it's essentially a dashed line. Okay, and if you're trying to be really neat with these, you're going to actually come along and measure these. So be about possibly 1/8 of an inch in length here with a 1/16 of an inch space, or something along those lines. Whatever you do, especially if you're trying to make it really neat, you want to actually measure those. Measure the spacing, little tiny dots along your construction line, so that you can make the hidden line. And if it's a drawing where it's not quite as critical, then you can just kind of estimate the distances, right? But I definitely want it, as you can see here, it's very uniform, and the dashes and spaces are the same throughout. You'll see some other lines in a minute where there's some variation, so we want to make sure that we know the difference. Okay, a center line then. Centers of arcs and circles. It's also used as a center of any cylindrical object or cylindrical feature of a part. Okay, I mean your whole part may be a cylindrical feature, might just be a rod, right? But then you're going to use a center line, and then this of course is long with a short dash, relatively short dash in the middle, and then long again. And if you're doing the center of a circle, then we'll see where you cross two of these. Go this way for the center going one direction, like horizontally, and go the other way, cross that up, and make the center. And these are very handy for showing that it is a circle, and then of course you often dimension to this line to show the actual location of that circle or round feature. Okay? Yeah. So thinner than an object line, about the same thickness as the hidden line. Okay. Dimension lines, they're again probably the same weight as the extension lines. I'm sorry, same weight as the center lines. Okay, and now it depends on what kind of drawing you're doing. I would suggest that lettered above the line is not the way we're going to do it. We're going to actually have a break in our extension line and write the number inside of it, okay? And when you're trying to do a really good drawing on that, you may be making yourself some tiny construction lines to make sure your letters are just the right size, okay? Or your letters and numbers are just the right size. But the weight of this, again, is about the same as a center line, okay? And your dimension lines typically go to and touch extension lines as a way to convey that information. Okay? And of course, we've talked before about the style for arrowheads. We'll mention that again at some point. But these do not make these great big things like this, for the arrowhead. It's a small arrowhead that we make with dimension lines. Okay? Extension lines, okay, so this you can see this is a little thinner line yet, thinner than the dimension lines, and definitely thinner than the object lines. The purpose here is we want to be able to show where a dimension, what feature a dimension refers to, but we don't want to confuse an extension line with the object line. Okay, we want to be very clear that this dark, heavy line is the object line, and these thin things are just there to provide clarity about where the dimensions refer. Okay, so that's the extension line, and we use them quite a bit in dimensioning. Phantom lines are cool, like this long dash, two short dashes, long dash, two short dashes. We probably will not use any of these in our drawings just because we're not going to do anything that sophisticated, but it'll be cool to show you what they do. I have this example coming up here at the end, and you can see a phantom line being used there, and it's a cool thing. It's a great feature for certain types of drawings. We probably won't be using that, but it's good for you to know that it exists. Okay? There are times in a drawing where if you have a great big long thing, say a thing is 8 feet long, but basically 7 feet of it is all the same cross section, like this common with something like an axle, right? An axle is this big long bar, and it's got a thing on this end to connect, a thing on the other end to connect, and the whole bar in between is just a cylindrical shape, right? So you can use a break line to take away part of it. Okay, say, okay, we're going to put a break line here and a break line here and just show you what this end looks like and show you what this end looks like and show you that cylindrical shape just for a little distance, just long enough for you to understand what it looks like without having to, if you were going to scale that down, if you're going to take a whole 8-foot long thing and scale it down onto a piece of paper, then the detail part that really matters, that say that flange that goes on the end, suddenly has to be tiny, tiny, and it's really hard to tell. Really hard to see the details of it. So a break line can allow you to shrink the whole thing down to a smaller space, still give enough information, right? But be able to have the detail part that you need. Here's a flange on this end, here are the splines on this end. They go into the two different places in the axle mechanism, right? So it's really important to see those features on either end. And the part in the center, you can just kind of take out a chunk to make it easier to represent the thing in a simple drawing. Okay, and this particular presentation differentiates between long break lines and short break lines. I don't think you need to worry about that. I think if you use either one of these for a break line, I think people understand. Okay, I don't know that we'll have any examples where we need to use this, but if you do, I'll accept either this kind of a break line versus the other. I think that the other break line is actually more obvious. That this is a break line because it's got those. I'll go back up for a second. Like these are really noticeable compared to just having kind of a raggedy line. I think this little like this. They look a little bit like the, look a little bit like the thing you see on television when the patient's heart is beating and then it goes flat. Yeah. Anyways, so that's how you create a break line. Okay. Cutting plane line is interesting too. We may do some activities with this, with some assignments with this. A cutting line is where you are taking an object and running this line through the object, right? And it's very important that you don't have the arrows here within the bounds of the object. This part might go right through the middle of a piece, right through a particular part of a piece, like a slice going through it, right? And then these arrows say, oh, we're cutting that thing apart. We're making a cutting section, taking it apart, and this indicates the direction then that the section view is going to indicate. Okay, it says, oh, well, when you see the section view, it's based on that direction, right along that line and that direction of point of view to see that object or that section. Okay, so the section line cuts through an object, and these arrows show the direction of visualization, the direction that you're looking. okay? Section lines, then when you have sectioned the object, say you've taken a slice and you've got the inside part of the material, these section lines show you where the solid area is from where you've cut it. Okay, and we'll see an example of this in a minute so you can see what I'm talking about. But just remember those leaders. Okay, this is when you're going to point to a feature and say something about it. Oh, quarter-inch diameter, quarter-inch diameter hole, typical 4x4 or something like that, right? So we've done this where we dimensioned our arc. That's called a leader, right? And importantly, yeah, the arrowheads go right up against the edge of the surface. They go right against that. The arrowhead stops right at that object line. Maybe it's an arc or something. And it comes right up against, the arrowhead comes in and touches it, points towards the center of the arc, as we've talked about. Okay, but that's a leader is for notes or dimensions. They're thin like a dimension line. Okay, and yeah, and generally they're going on an angle relative to the surface they're pointing at. You're not gonna have them come typically straight up out of something. Okay. Borderlines are also thick. When you're doing a formal drawing, you may need to have borderlines on the page, and they're going to be dark, like the object line. Okay, nice and dark, very very noticeable. Like, oh, this is here for real, right? No construction line equivocation. It's like no, the borderline. That's you can see here. They're showing that as a really dark object, right? And some people even make these more bold than the object lines. But they're definitely as bold as an object line, okay? All right, and looking at this page, hopefully you can read this. I'm going to zoom in again just a little bit just to talk about it. Okay. Now what's cool is this gives us a pretty good idea of some of the different things, right? Where I have this phantom line thing I mentioned, like I said, that we're probably not going to use. This indicates that this piece, this part of the entire assembly, can move to a different position, and they show that with this little swing line here, this curving center line, and this other stuff. This phantom line says, oh, well, we're showing it to you for real here, but it could also move up to here, right? So that's a phantom line. Center line, we talked about, going through the circle. Notice how when you've got a circle here, we're using this as a thing to dimension to, right? So the center line of this hole, right here, comes down and says, oh, that center line is 1.75 units, probably inches, I suppose, from this edge of the object, right? And here they've done a section where they cut this away, and they're showing the internal parts. Since there is a hole through there, they did not make this. They didn't put section lines there because that's a slightly empty space, right? And of course, hidden lines, object lines, center lines again, and so on, right? Oh yeah, here's a cutting plane line. But I don't see the section view. When you do a cutting plane line like this, then somewhere there should be a view that shows you what you would see. When you slice it like this, what does it look like? Okay? Anyhow, so we'll have some experiences, some activities where we try out these different things. And here's a little review that these are these like in the hierarchy says when you've got something like a hidden line, like there's a hidden feature behind a visible feature, right? Like this line here is visible as an edge of the object, but there's also a hidden line behind it from some other thing. Well, the hidden line just doesn't show. If the object line is there, it takes precedence over the hidden line, right? And so on like that. This isn't really a big deal. Most of the time, this is pretty intuitive. Okay, and that's it for the presentation. We'll have some actual activities then for you to practice making these lines and try and do a really good job of getting the weights correct and little spacings and stuff like that. So a person reading the drawing can recognize. The whole idea is for clarity. So it should be easy for a reader to look at that and say, oh, right, I recognize those little dashes. That's a hidden line. Oh, I see this circle with the other line. That's a center line, and that tells me where the middle of it is, and so on like that. So that's the whole idea of doing these. All right, thanks for watching.